Experts is sponsoring this talk, I believe. Yeah, this time. One of the sponsors for this Agile meetup. Not this time, but previously. So what we do at Equal Experts is we tend to work with different companies, and we do software delivery, but we also do coaching, and it's across the whole spectrum. So we do a little bit of service design work, we also do sort of building software, coaching teams, building up capability on our client side, and offering support on the strategic side of things as well. So basically in the last year I've been doing, as I mentioned, training, delivery, and some coaching, and there's kind of three main themes under which I've kind of had a lot of food for thought. So there's a lot of stuff that's come out around sustainability and what sustainability actually means for not just teams but also for businesses as a whole. There's stuff around how can we actually learn safely. I know the word failure has always had a bad tone, and we've obviously had like a couple of very big tech failures as well. You know, companies like Facebook and Uber, there have been big stories of failure. So there's obviously a lot of discomfort around that. And then the last bit is around sort of how we can be creative, and I think that for me, sort of being creative and learning safely ties very much into sustainability. Because I think for us to be sustainable as teams, as businesses, we need to be able to learn safely and learn quickly. And we also need to be able to have fun while we're doing it, and be creative and experiment as we're doing it. So on sustainability, the bulk of the kind of work that I've been exposed to has been around delivering stuff. So generally stuff is working software. We're building digital products and digital services, and we're trying to push to production. And obviously as we're doing that, we tend to come across a lot of tech debt. You know, especially because of the work that we do, we come into organisations where there's been a build-up of tech debt, and without talking about the use of the word debt, because it's not maybe the right word to use, but there's obviously a lot of problems that happen because we don't continue to invest in our tooling and in how we work, and continuing to kind of improve what we've built in the past to make sure it can continue to scale and extend. And obviously, as this cartoon kind of shows, trying to fix the problems just gets harder and harder and harder, and we end up in this sort of cyclical mess, and it becomes much harder to then get buy-in from the rest of the organisation to like take 6 months off just to fix things. It's like we're losing revenue, we're losing market share, what's the value in that, you know? This stuff should just work. And this is a big enough problem as it is on the technical side when we think about our digital products. I think this also happens at a much bigger scale when we talk about businesses as a whole. So this is a common pattern that I've seen, and this kind of cog model is based off a talk. I can't remember unfortunately who gave the talk, but it really sort of landed a couple of ideas, a couple of concepts for me, where if you imagine if we looked at the business like this, well, we've got technology as a cog, product as a cog, and the rest of the business as a cog. And obviously this comprises of the supporting teams, like you've got customer support, you've got marketing, maybe sales, who also directly liaise with customers. And then you've got our back office functions like finance, HR, legal. The idea is that all of us, all these cogs work together to deliver value for our business, whatever that is. And oftentimes, what we'll try to do is we'll try to optimize the speed of technology. So you can imagine technology might be able to deploy once an hour, or once a day, or once a week. So they're working at a pretty fast pace. They're a really small cog. Then you've got product, who have a slightly longer cycle. For product to do their job well, to contribute the value that they contribute, they have to do things like validate the customer problem. Like, is that really the right problem to solve? So that requires user research, it requires prototyping, it requires other activities, which you can't necessarily do within an hour or a day. So those cycle times are a little bit longer. And then we've got like the rest of the so-called business. And what we've often found as a common pattern is that we might be ready to deploy software or to upgrade a product, let's say once a week or once a month. But what we have to do is we actually have to wait for an extra couple of weeks to make sure that everybody else is ready. So what we end up doing is we end up working at the slowest pace, which is this. So rather than focusing on trying to make sure that these cogs are of an equal size, so we're all working at a similar pace to be able to deliver value, we find that we optimize for the wrong bits to the wrong degree, and actually we end up with frustrated teams because they're constantly waiting. And for me, this kind of summarizes what I would describe as business debt. I think we've incurred a lot of business debt, which we don't look at, And all we're looking at doing is paying off the tech debt and the product debt and making sure that we can optimize these smaller cogs. I can see a couple of people nodding. Does this kind of resonate for anybody? Yeah? Yeah. And for me, this is very much like an anti-pattern. We just keep throwing more and more money at a problem that's kind of already solved and not focusing on the actual problem to solve. So for me, this means that as a business, we're not really sustainable. But we have alternatives. So one thing I've seen work quite well at a couple of my client sites, and I was lucky enough to be able to try this out as well in the UK government, and then also most recently in a fintech startup overseas, is if we kind of think about it like this, where each of these cogs is maybe a customer problem area, or it's a customer outcome. And what we do is we say that a combination of product, tech, and supporting teams, including marketing and sales and support, they are like a mini business unit. So this is the business, and they all come together as virtual teams to deliver on a particular outcome. And this could be like a temporary team that comes to deliver an outcome and then moves back into like the general pool. And some of these people might be shared on solving another problem or another problem. But the idea is that you've got an end-to-end ability to be able to deliver value working at the same speed as each other, because they're part of one team. So one of the ways in which we did this at the fintech startup that I mentioned is we use service design practices basically. So what we did is we said our value as a company is that, or our mission as a company is that we want to make sure that we can bring the humanity back into banking. So to bring the humanity back into banking, everything we do is going to be focused on our customer. Absolutely everything we do is going to be focused on the person whose money we're managing. So what we did is we mapped out our customers. There were two main types of customers, and we wrote down what problems we had to solve for them. So what were their core needs? And these core needs were not just functional needs, like I need to know how much money I have, I need to know what I'm going to do with my money, but they're actually the social, emotional needs, the stuff that really matters. Like I need to feel secure in my future. And I need to have trust that my money is being looked after. So there's a lot of stuff around security, transparency, trust, and care that kind of comes out, especially around money for people. And I'm sure you can all relate to that, right? Like, no one trusts the banks. It all goes into a big vault, a black hole. You know, it feels like it's much harder to get your money, even though it's your money, than it should be. You get charged all these fees, so there's already a lot of distrust in this area. So we said it's really important for us to make sure that we focus on the customer outcomes that matter, which is around trust and visibility and transparency. And then what we did is we said, okay, so we've got these customers, and with these problems to solve, who are the people who are going to interact directly with them and help solve their problems? So this is where we had really key people like, we had customer support. They are, more often than not, the people who have the closest relationship with our customers, especially those of us who work in product teams. We're usually like 2 to 3 steps removed from our customers. So customer support is like the best proxy for our customer. So we had customer support there. In our case, sometimes sales and marketing would have a direct relationship as well, because we had really active community forums. So we'd sometimes post a question like, what do you think is causing the gender pay gap in this city? And then people would like respond, and they'd have ideas, and then we'd ask them, okay, what are some things you think that we can build into our app to help address this problem? And then there'd be like a creative design jam, and people would come into the office and we'd kind of play around with ideas. So marketing were actually really critical for helping to meet the problems of these customers of ours. And in the case of where we were offering home loans, we had home loan officers who would meet the customers and who would sort of help fill out the home loan applications and actually help grant the home loan applications to the customers. So this group were the people who were closest to the customers. And in this kind of layer, we had our product, because our product obviously is the digital interface to the customer. But the important thing to note is we are not in this layer as product and tech. We are in this layer. We are delivering the tools that help these people and these people to achieve their outcomes. And so then we started to look at who else is in this group that works to deliver to meet the problems of these people and these people. And so apart from product and technology, we had risk and legal. So risk and legal are incredibly important in banking, obviously. So they're a core part of our delivery team. Whereas in other industries, maybe not so much. And then this further layer outside, we had who are the people who are going to enforce and govern us to make sure that everything we're doing is legally compliant, to make sure that we're not only legally compliant, but we're also following through on commitments to the board, for example, or commitments to our shareholders. So this was kind of like the governance layer, where we would have, we had like various committees, we had the board, we had the C-suite, and then outside we've got people who might be able to influence us, like regulators, for example, or committees, external committees. So what we did is we mapped this out and we said these are all the people who are involved in delivering value to our end customers. And what we're going to do is, at any point in time, when we're solving a problem for this particular customer, we're going to identify the slice end-to-end of people who need to be involved to actually deliver that. So we're going to find out how do we define that problem, how does that impact these people, what do they need to be able to see in their support tools, what do we need to be able to do in order to enable them to be able to do that stuff? And then what do these people need to be able to do? They probably need reports. They probably need real-time visibility of some of the problems that are occurring here to measure the risk, to be able to make decisions. So this is kind of where service design comes in, because we kind of look at a problem end-to-end, and we deliver it end-to-end rather than a feature that just works here, and then there's a separate feature to deliver some tool over here, and then there's a separate report to meet the needs of these people. And what we found is that by doing that, we were actually able to break down a lot of the silos. So a lot of the people who were working in the startup had actually come from very traditional financial backgrounds. So they'd come from large banks. And I don't actually, with the exception of maybe 2 people in the C-suite, nobody else had startup experience. So you can imagine as soon as they started up, I think within a year we had something like 40 people. And I would say maybe 25% of the organization were managers. And then we had doers, and this is a startup. So they were very good at understanding at a high level the risks and the governance and the kind of reporting that needed to be done, but they couldn't get the jobs done. They couldn't write the policies. They couldn't do the user research. They couldn't do any of that stuff. So what we found is that by breaking down these silos and having service designers, by having product people and tech people, take these people on this journey, we were able to have these cross-functional teams that were able to work in a completely different way. And obviously it's painful in the beginning, and it feels very unfamiliar. But we actually were able to deliver 2 products earlier than we expected and earlier than we communicated to the shareholders, including an Android app that's actually just gone out last week. So there were a lot of learnings from that for us, especially around how you manage virtual teams, and how you can create a shared sense of responsibility across the organization. One thing that definitely came up was that because it's a startup, there's obviously the same pool of people that you're using to be able to address a number of needs end-to-end. So it's not like you've got loads of people you can tap into. It's just the same group of people who are going to be working on multiple streams of work. And what that meant is that it made us much better as an organization in prioritizing work, because we had constraints. So constraints were awesome. But what it meant was we could actually prioritize the outcomes rather than the functional bits of work that people were doing. Any question? Yep?
Yeah, can I ask that in practice? Can I ask in practice kind of how this model looks? So if you have, like a lawyer or a risk manager working within your product development cycle, would they be there in kickoffs? Would they be there like at product reviews? Yeah, how did that work in practice?
Yeah, so what we did is, another new practice we brought in was that we started inceptions for any new thing. So we would incept and we figure out what's the problem we're trying to solve, and it could be a business and or customer problem. So they would be part of the kickoff. So we generally have like a day, and there's a standard format we would run through to validate the problem, maybe commission some user research to validate further. And then what we would do is, just like we've got these different circles, that would tell us what level of involvement people needed to have. So some of these people were involved on a daily basis, and some people would come maybe once or twice a week. So at the end of, I think like for one of the groups, we were doing it weekly, where we would have some of the governance people and legal and finance sort of come along as part of kind of validating what we've done and basically stress test what we were proposing. But I think the main thing is to be pragmatic, because obviously everybody's busy, and rather than say that everybody has to be in all the ceremonies 100% of the time, this kind of works as a rough framework for figuring out what level of involvement people need to have. And then in terms of like the showcases, So we would have, rather than wait till the end of 2 weeks to do a demo, we'd actually do demos in time. So because everybody was on the same floor, as soon as something was ready to be shown, we'd quickly grab each of the people, we'd huddle around a developer's desk, and then we'd have a look. So that meant that it also reduced the effort and the urgency of having a massive demo at the end of a week or at the end of a fortnight. Does that kind of answer the question? Yeah? Cool. Anything else? Cool, and there's some other great examples. So I mentioned that I've worked with the UK government in the past, and EE has done a lot of work with the UK government. They've actually done some really innovative things. They've got a really strong service design practice throughout a lot of their government departments. They've got really good service design standards and patterns as well, design patterns that you can follow and principles. And one government department in particular, if you're interested in reading a good case study, there's a government department called DEFRA, D-E-F-R-A. And what they've done is they've basically reshuffled their entire department, it's one of the bigger departments, to focus around specific customer services or user services. So it's kind of end-to-end where they've got user researchers, service designers, product, tech, policy people as well. They'll have economists, they've got other types of analysts as well, and they all kind of work together on these individual services. And the great thing is they identify what the actual outcome is for the customers, and in some cases you'll actually have a bunch of different departments working together in a sort of virtual service team to deliver on that outcome. So they're doing amazing work, and I'd highly recommend checking out their blogs on how they're actually doing that. And then the other thing I would recommend is actually reading this book. I started reading this book, and I started at the end of the book. And it's actually really, really good. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Clayton Christensen. He wrote about the jobs to be done framework. And this is the latest book coming from him and his colleagues. And what's different about this book is that he not only talks about jobs to be done, but he actually talks about how you can organize your whole organization around jobs to be done to make sure you don't have those functional silos and you don't have budgets issued functionally or in conflicting ways, or you don't have KPIs, for example, that actually introduce perverse behaviours and destructive behaviours in teams. So that's actually a really, really good read as well. Cool. And I guess like a key takeaway for me was that funding, so funding teams and outcomes is far more important than projects and products. You know, even though we think that it feels right to fund a product, sometimes you get perverse behaviours where a product shouldn't even exist. And what we should actually do is focus on the outcome we're trying to achieve. And actually you could achieve it without a digital product. So that's where I think it's about the outcomes and the teams. Because if you have a team, the team can figure out the right problem to solve in the right way. Whether it's through a product or it's a service or it's a process. They're not tied to the solution being a product. And obviously we all know the dangers of projects because they're short-lived. There's no ongoing accountability and ownership. And the other thing is, there's a lot of frustration in a lot of the clients that we worked with because teams weren't trusted. They didn't get what they needed in order to do their jobs, and they weren't held accountable, or other people weren't held accountable. And that's obviously, that's one of the biggest impacts on motivation levels when there's no accountability, not only individually, but also for groups and for other individuals. So that was it on sustainability. Are there any questions around that? No?
Yes. Were the teams short-lived, or yes?
The virtual teams?
The teams
Yes.
in general. So they were built to solve that problem.
Yeah.
When that problem was solved, they would be decommissioned.
Disbanded.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How do you guys deal with the whole team forming stages?
Yeah. Because it's always very stressful and
Yeah.
So it was very stressful and it was very difficult. Again, because it was a startup, it was oftentimes pretty much the same people. There just might have been a couple of people who were different.
Okay.
So it didn't feel like you were starting a whole new team from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
So every time we kicked off like a new initiative, it was easier and faster than the previous time.
Okay.
I think actually the bigger challenge was having this ongoing sense of ownership, because once the team disbanded, how would you make sure that the outcome would continue to be met for the customer, for example, and we continue to make incremental improvements? But that's where the customer support function came in. So customer support were basically holding the entire organization together. So they were really good at owning that, and they basically owned the customer experience.
So a bug that appeared after the problem was solved by this customer support team, or would they call to the guys who developed initially the whole thing?
Well, they'd first find out about it, and then they'd bring people into it. So because it was quite small, they'd be able to grab a developer, the dev would look into it, and then they'd validate whether or not it was a problem. And then we'd figure out, well, do we need a process solution for it, or like a digital solution for it? So we were able to be a little bit more flexible in terms of how we solve problems as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think other thing that we sometimes find is that when you've got the product team owning the product, I guess, and all the problems kind of come to the product team, sometimes it's assumed that you have to come up with a digital solution, and that's not always the case. And similarly, sometimes if you've got customer support as the initial point of contact and they're doing a very effective, very altruistic type of triage, they'll say, well, actually, we'll come up with a process solution, when actually you could have come up with a digital solution to make it easier. So the great thing was the teams were actually talking to each other, or it was a single team. They were talking to each other.
Thank you.
What about accountability, team accountability? What do you mean by that?
What do I mean? As in, like on the last slide?
Yeah.
So we've kind of seen some examples. Do any of you want to jump in on this one, or should I? Yeah, okay. So there are examples like where, like let's say there's a production bug, and let's say it's a complex environment and it's not clear which team owns the bug. Like especially in the case when you've got a monolith, ownership can sometimes be hard to determine. So sometimes a triage process can actually take quite a while, because customer support will call in because the customer has complained. They'll approach a tech team, and then they'll find out that this team isn't the one to solve the problem. Then they have to try to find who actually would be able to solve the problem. And before you know it, it's been 3-4 days. We have no update for the customer. We still haven't figured out who owns the problem, let alone who's going to solve the problem and how long that's going to take. And so there's no accountability towards the customer for like the experience that they're having. So it's around that. It's like making sure that we're not just focused on our part of the puzzle, we're actually thinking about the whole.
Okay.
And sometimes that causes a lot of frustration then, because customer support feel like tech aren't doing their jobs, or product aren't doing their jobs. Product and tech feel like they aren't being given enough information, so it just creates that breakdown.
Okay.
Yeah.
And clear for me.
Yeah, okay, cool. No worries.
I have a question. How to give the value to the team?
How to give the value to the team?
Yes.
How do you mean, sorry?
How the teams are interest of the business, of the development of the
So
product.
how to get the team interested in the business and actually feeling the
Because now
pain.
you have a task, okay, you have to do it. So okay, I don't. I just so how can a developer be interested? Because how can he be motivated to do his task, and he knows that he has someone that the company or someone trusts in him and in the team for.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that empathy is key. I think a lot of the breakdown happens because there's so many levels of abstraction between the developer and the person who's feeling the pain or whose problem is being solved, and the idea is to bridge that gap. So, for example, having developers sit in on customer support calls every week for an hour or 2 hours a week is a great way to be able to see what happens at the end of that cycle. Once you've been coding and stuff, what kind of impact does that actually have on someone? And then how stressed are they? How do they actually feel about it? That I've seen has been very effective for a lot of teams. Another thing is to actually, again it ties in with empathy, is to actually get developers, product people, whoever they are, out actually seeing the customers. So watching the customers do their jobs, using their product, whatever it is. And again, that helps put things in perspective. It's not to say that it's necessarily going to work for everybody, but oftentimes it's that kind of user research and that direct contact with the client, with the customer, that actually helps bridge that gap. And it makes you understand the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. That it's actually to help this person pay their bill, or it's to help this person book an appointment for their child. And when they aren't able to do that, they can see the frustration, the fact that they're now stressed that their child might be sick, they might need to go to hospital, and that's a real concern, that you can relate to as a person.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's all right. I don't know if anybody else has other strategies as well that they use for creating that sense of co-ownership. Cool, so the next one was around learning safely. So I like this definition of failure. So where we say there's good failure, which basically means that it's cheap, the cost of the failure isn't high, it's not like we've broken our business, and we learn from it. So it happens once, second time doesn't happen, because we actually learn from it. Then there's bad failure, and bad failure is expensive, so we could actually bring down our business, and it keeps repeating itself, so we don't actually learn from it, so we keep doing the same thing again and again. And I often find that the larger the organisation, the more bad failure there is, because the institutional memory tends to be very poor. You've got lots of people who come in, they make these big changes, and they leave. And then you've got new people who come in, and they don't learn from the past, they want to put their stamp, and they'll make the same mistakes, and then they'll leave. So the larger the organisation, the more likely it seems to be that bad failure is going to be present. But we've also seen this in lots of small organisations as well. So it's a given that we will fail and that things will break. That's, no matter how many assumptions we make and then we try to test, or how much analysis we do, we can't know everything and we can't test for every single scenario. So things are going to break. So the actual question, I think, becomes how do we actually minimise the damage, and how do we learn safely and quickly? So one of the big takeaways for me in the last year, I used to always focus on trying to avoid failure. And now I think that as a consultant, I think my job is not to actually stop failure. What it is to actually preempt and inform my clients of the impact, to tell them what's going to happen a couple of steps ahead, and to help set up the support structures so that when that happens, they can quickly get themselves up and move forward. And we see this all the time, right? We get really frustrated because we can see something's going to break. We tell the person, they don't do anything about it. It breaks, and then you go, I told you so. It's so frustrating when that happens. But that's why I realized our job is not actually to stop failure. It's to help the people who make the decisions to understand what they're actually committing to. And that's partly coming down to this thing about experiential learning. So there are some things that you actually need to experience to really understand. No amount of explaining it to someone is going to make them understand it. They actually have to experience it to go, got it. And sometimes it can be really hard to see that happen. I'm sure those of you who have children see that all the time. Yep. It's even harder to see that happen to an adult because you think, you should know better. There's no substitute for experiential learning. That's actually how we function as human beings. So rather than fight it, I think it's better to accept it and figure out what we can do about it. So I want to talk about a case study for a recent client that I worked with. So I joined the project when it was on fire, and what had happened is that we had a single team who was basically delivering two products. One was like a manual home loans product. Let's just go for the sake of argument, you can have manual home loans, like paper-based home loans. And then there was like a digital home loans product where you could do everything from searching for, applying for, getting a home loan all online. And it was the same team that was working on not only building, but also figuring out how they were going to run these two parallel offerings. And with home loans, as I'm sure you could understand, building it is the easy bit. Like you build the ability to be able to write a home loan and issue money, great. This is the bit that takes 40 to 50 years because people can continue to contact you throughout the whole life of their home loan. So you need to have a business in place that's going to be able to help support those customers for the next 40 to 50 years of their lives. So this single team of 3 people was trying to build these two propositions and figure out how they were going to run them while working with 2 completely different partners who were delivering on aspects of each of these propositions. And this particular company was like their USP, like the thing that really set them apart from other companies, was the fact that they focused on customer experience. So for them, customer experience was 100% everything. There's no way they would negotiate on that. And not only customer experience, but a digital customer experience. So everything was mobile first. So even having like a manual home loan didn't really go ahead with, like it didn't really align with their brand. And even the shareholders weren't entirely convinced that was the right thing to do. But they said, no, we're going to do it because we need to make money. And in parallel, they had these partners. Now both of these partners had never worked in digital customer products before. So for a company that is trying to say that they have the best digital customer experience, these weren't necessarily the best partners to partner with. But these partners offered other things, other enablement factors for the organization. So they enabled them to change what their business could look like in 2 to 3 years and potentially offer other offerings that no other partners could. So they made a decision to go with that enablement rather than the actual customer experience. So what we did is we ran an Inception to figure out what are the priorities of the business and the customer outcomes. So we could figure out, can we prioritize one of these service offerings? And then once we're done to a certain degree with one, then we can look at the next one, because we know that we don't have the capacity to be able to work on both in parallel. So we asked these questions. Can we build 2 offerings in parallel? And the answer was no, we definitely can't. Can we run 2 offerings in parallel, even if we were able to build them? And no, we couldn't, because it would be too expensive and it would require us to hire, and we couldn't hire. Could we even meet the needs of our customers? And it turned out that actually no, we weren't able to meet the needs of our customers either. So then we kind of asked, should we even be doing this work? Like, should we even launch either of these offerings? And the team who was doing the work said, no, we shouldn't have even started this. We never believed in it. So it was basically someone at the C-suite who was putting pressure to build these offerings so that they could provide a message to the market, so that they could get more funding. And that's obviously a very real pressure that companies face as well. You need to have money to be able to continue to build and deliver value. But as you can see, it didn't really sound like this should have gotten off the floor, gotten off the ground. So what we realized is that one of the main drivers that resulted in this project going through for 5-6 months and then being killed, because it was killed in the end, which is a good outcome, was that everybody in that organization, and this was a startup, everybody in that organization had a really strong optimism bias. They had this fundamental belief that they can make anything happen. And you kind of need that. You often read a lot about the mindset that entrepreneurs have, right? And early stage startup employees have. They believe anything can happen. And it's kind of that crazy belief that also helps some pretty incredible things happen. But the flip side of that is that sometimes then it means that you are not learning very quickly. We're not actually looking at the data that's coming to us or the signs that are coming to us and saying, fine, anything might be able to happen, but actually maybe not entirely anything. Maybe some things can't happen right now, but maybe in the future. So it's like that realism was kind of lost. So one of the things that we kind of struggled with was like, and this was a general challenge across the organization, like how can we keep that optimism bias while still learning fast and failing safely? Because in the life of a startup, especially an early stage startup, 5 to 6 months of 6 people working on a project is pretty expensive. That's not money that you can get back very easily. And you're working with external partners. So you're also paying them, plus we're burning confidence and trust potentially as well. And all of these things are incredibly important at that stage. So I don't have an answer for that one. I don't know if anybody here has an answer for that one, as to how you can actually create a better balance. But that was something we really struggled with.
It's a superpower called common sense.
Yeah. How do you inject someone with common sense?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It probably falls from the sky or the meteorite,
Yeah.
because it's so seldom you find it.
Then there are several definitions of common sense.
Yes. True. True. Yeah.
Don't they, isn't the magic in the middle, by keeping the optimism that you will learn fast and fail safely?
Yeah. And like focus on like being able to learn. Like, I think there was something about how, like, there's something about optimism, which is like, anything can happen. So it's not like we don't even have to learn, right? There's nothing to learn because anything is possible. But you're right, it's like trying to say, well, actually, no, maybe you need to learn some things in order to make anything happen. But that's the thing that we found very difficult to try to, the message was really hard to land because, you know, there was so much, it's the typical thing that happen with a lot of startups, like there's swag all the time, there's parties, people are inviting them out, there's lots of like, you know, cool social media stuff happening. So it feels like you're in a club, you know, it feels like you're part of something really, really special. Like even when I was there, I felt like I was part of something really special. I felt like there's nothing like this in the world. You know, so it is a really hard thing to kind of break through. I mean, do you have like specific strategies that, you know, you could see working there?
Reality. I think coaching is a lot about confronting reality. So a way to bring people back from the sky to earth is adding weight. So it's okay to keep this optimism, but this is the real data that we have. Like the number of issues that we have, the NPS of our application. This is the latest customer report on how they feel. They like this application, how they can recommend this application. So I think only reality can bring people back to reality.
Yeah, maybe making them more aware of the real world impacts. Like, so one thing that we didn't do is we didn't forecast and say, okay, well, if you continue to run this project, you know, for every month that you run, this is how much money you're burning, and therefore this is what the cost is going to be. But maybe having like hard numbers like that can also help bring things to reality.
There are also other strategies like those that were already covered by Edward de Bono many years ago, and there's one even older, which comes from the Vatican. It's the Devil's Advocate.
But the thing is, like, we did all of this.
It didn't work.
No.
Even data, even hard data.
We did use some data, yeah. Like, so for example, like the fact that at some stage, when the announcement was made to the shareholders, for example, that they were going to have a manual product, people weren't happy about it. So we said, these are how many complaints we got in the session, and then people were, obviously when you complain, like you write a letter to complain or an email, it means you're really, really frustrated, right? You're really angry. Something's really motivated you. So we actually had people email in as well and call support to say, actually, we really don't think this is in line with the brand values. So even having that wasn't enough. But I don't know, like I'm a bit optimistic. I feel like there must be a way.
So you suffer from the same...
The same thing, exactly, yeah. It'd be an interesting one to do as a case study, as a drill down case study. Maybe as like, you know, one of these fishbowl talks or something. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think my job is to stop failure because I can't. I can't make those decisions. Other people are empowered to make those decisions. But hopefully what I can do is try to preempt, inform what the impact is going to be, help set up the support structures so that when people do fall down, they can easily get up again and then continue on.
Can you kind of describe in the situation you were talking about, so you saw a failure was coming, what did you do in terms of setting up and helping them move forward afterwards, knowing that it was going to come? Because that really interests me. Like, would you rather just get angry?
Sorry, did I just get angry?
Just get angry.
Oh, right. So I was lucky because I had a very good relationship with the head of product, who was essentially the one driving and making the decisions. So he and I were able to have very frank conversations. And I remember like when his tipping point was, when he sort of came to me and he said, yeah, we're probably not going to be able to do both of these things. And I was like, I think you're right. And so we had a good conversation about like what we thought the impact was going to be. And he made his fear very clear. He said, look, I'm actually a little bit concerned because obviously if we stop, we're going to say this is how much money we've blown and we have nothing to show for it. And we're a startup. So people are going to expect to see things, see results. So I said, okay, fine. What can we do to help allay that fear? Can we actually quantify how much money we might have saved? You know, like, can you imagine the brand damage, for example? Like people who have invested, because it was crowdfunded, People who've invested, people who've joined our waitlist, who've become customers, are like hardcore advocates, right? Can you imagine the brand damage if we do something that's not in line with our brand? Like, these people are 100% on board. So it was about trying to understand, okay, for all of the fears that he had, these are the things that he was avoiding happening. So like, you know, losing our loyal base, I can't remember some of the other ones, but, you know, kind of identifying what those things were and help weave that into a bit of a narrative then, because he obviously had to sell that story to the C-suite, who then needed to sell that story to the board, and that's not easy. And then a part of it was trying to figure out, okay, well, let's just say these projects stop. What are the things that we can say that we've learned from it so that actually the rest of the organisation doesn't make the same mistakes? So it ends up being good failure. And what we found is that some of the work that we did on the digital home loans, we actually had a little bit of a skeleton that we could actually use for a slightly different use case, where we could potentially white label it and offer it to other businesses. So we had a potential business there, or a potential revenue source. So it was also about seeing what opportunities we'd created without necessarily doing a full delivery. And that, when I left, because I left in September, when I left, they were in conversations with at least one other company around potentially using that product and sort of smacking their own label on it. Is that kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does, but it also feels like a bit like, as a consultant, you help your individual client contacts handle that situation better. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like as the company as a whole, as a legacy, I don't know, it just seems like a very tough, when you put the slide up, I was like, hey, you're not something very, but what can you do then?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that they started doing, which I think was really good, is on Monday stand-ups, on Monday huddles, they would actually talk about something they learned from the previous week. So that actually provides a really positive forum where you can actually talk about some of these things without fear of shame. But the reality is you still have to go through the fearful process to get to the point where you can talk about it comfortably. And so I would say like that was maybe one of the support structures that might help some of the other people, you know, like if they hear people talking about failure, they go, okay, fine, maybe I can also talk about it. Yeah.
Maybe someone knows the responsibility process from Christopher Avery.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Christopher Avery, the responsibility process.
No, I haven't heard of that.
No, he
No.
speaks about that, about the denial.
Yeah,
It's your fault.
right,
And you deny that it's your fault.
right.
And you pass the next stage and you deny your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And then some kind of the first step where I explain, you start to think, yeah, probably it's my fault, and then you take a choice. Or you accept that it's my fault and you will be accountable, or you give up. That is Christopher Avery.
Christopher Avery.
Yeah, he's a responsibility process. He was here in Portugal in Agile Meetup
Nice.
2 months ago. I suggest everyone to read that.
Yeah, I mean that could be a really interesting thing, right? So then as you're kind of speaking with...
I use that to, it's a pyramid and I used it a lot in my Scrum teams.
Yeah.
When they start fighting, it's not my fault, it's not my fault.
Yeah, do you kind of bring it up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works, I have people that, okay, they set to the fourth step where they decide, okay, I will do something about it. I have a lot of people that completely denial and you have no solution, but you cannot do anything about it.
But if it doesn't work, it's not your fault.
It's my fault. I'm accountable for that. At least I think I should know why that person is not taking the right step.
Will you do some coaching or you move the person?
Oh, we tried. It's a long story. Some person we try to send to other team.
That's a good idea though, because yeah, I have seen like with a number of people, when you show a framework, especially once they've experienced a part of the journey or they've experienced it entirely before, especially people when they're very reflective, that can kind of make sense to them. Yeah.
But Christopher is an expert on that area, and he has a book where he explains the part of psychology, some part it's more than the psychology. It's how our brain reacts to information.
Yeah.
And he explains all that in his book.
Nice.
And we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, thanks for the tip. Like there's lots of fear responses that kick in first, right? And you need to let them die down before your executive functioning kind of kicks in. Yeah. No, that's a good one. That would be definitely like a useful support structure. Cool. So the last one was around being creative, and I think this actually ties in, I think I mentioned, with sustainability as well, because like obviously like a lot of research shows that in order to keep us mentally, physically happy, we should be playing, we should be having fun. I think of all the primate species, we're the only primate species that stops actively playing in our adulthood, which is not healthy. So yeah, so a lot of this is around how can we bring play and creativity into our day-to-day jobs, because yeah, fine, we solve problems in our jobs, but it'd be much better if we could have fun at the same time and learn. So in terms of this question, how we can bring a little bit of magic into our day-to-day, I've seen different teams do like different things. So one thing I've really missed actually from our network, we used to have this guy, Sean, and every Friday around 4 or 4:30, what he used to do is he used to say, okay, it's Friday Scrabble time. And what he would do is he'd put whatever challenge up. So sometimes it might be, tell us how your day was using emojis. Or finish your sentence with, and then the murders began. And you'll see the entire network just go crazy. And this is one example. I mean, for some reason, everybody loved puns. Everyone was a pun master, so the pun ones would totally go off. But it was really great. It was an awesome way to be able to actually get to know people who you hadn't actually met face to face. So at least you'd have like virtual relationships with them. Does anybody here play games on Slack or use like interesting plugins-ish? No?
Any recommendations?
Well, actually, do you know what meme generator Diogo uses?
Yeah.
Meme, yeah. We have a meme master.
He does it by himself.
Does he?
He's the meme generator.
Yeah. I mean, Giphies are fun. They can be quite fun. But yeah, meme generator. I have used some games on Slack. I'll try to dig them up actually, because are we sharing the presentations? I can put the links in the presentation. Yeah, I can put the links in the presentation. Yeah. And then the other thing, so at EcoExperts we have these things called, what are they called?
Icebreaker.
Thank you, icebreaker cards.
Icebreaker.
Yeah, so they've got like different types of questions. So, you know, would you prefer to have spoons for hands or canoe paddles for feet? Debate. In a zombie apocalypse, what would your survival strategy be? So, like, some of the questions are quite interesting, you know, they're a bit fun, they're a bit kitsch, but at least it gets a conversation going, and it gets kind of people talking. We've seen colleagues of ours take it to the next couple of levels. So, a couple of weeks ago, one of our colleagues started actually getting people to draw the answers, which was hilarious. And then somebody else took it to the next level, and they got people to act out the answers. So I think one of the questions is something like, what's your name in whale? So the clients had an amazing time with that. And the idea is like, you know, just have a little bit of fun. It shouldn't be forced, obviously, but I think part of the fun, part of the creativity is in actually coming up with the games themselves, not just playing them. And another area where I've definitely seen, well, I've actually actively tried to experiment a lot more is with like the actual core tools that we use in our toolkit, especially the product toolkit. So for me, like I use story maps all the time. Does anybody here use story maps? Yeah, cool. So a big bugbear of mine is that generally the way that people use story maps and the way we're told to use story maps is to focus on the functional needs of the users. Whereas, as I mentioned, it's the social and the emotional needs that are just as important, if not more important. So my teams and I basically hack story maps to add those other needs in there as well. And then we can figure out, are we delivering not just functional stuff, but a little bit of delight in some of these things? Or actually, is there an entire feature that's just pure delight, that's actually meeting a really core fundamental need, social need or emotional need for someone? So even like the tools that we have and the canvases that we have, we can totally hack to meet our needs. And actually, there's something quite fun about that. Yep, loads of other tools that you can kind of play around with and repurpose for your needs. Out of curiosity, has anybody sort of hacked any of the kind of well-known tools out there, or like repurposed them for their own needs? like a business model canvas or opportunity canvases or anything like that? Cool. So I guess in closing, yeah, a lot of my focus, or a lot of the realizations that I had this last year were very much around sustainability at a much bigger level, you know, around organizations rather than just teams, and around how organizations can learn safely, and how we can actually be creative and have a bit of fun while we're doing that. So that's it. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Everyone gets an early mark, gets to go home. Nice.